Hello all, welcome back to the BioDocs channel. In this video today, we are going to learn about the gonadotropic hormones. Okay, so the gonadotropic hormones, when you listen to this term, we are just reminded with the two of the hormones which have been released. They are going to be a follicle stimulating hormone as well as a luteinizing hormone. So how are they being secreted and what influence are they being secreted? We'll be learning today about them in detail. Okay. So we are talking about the gonadotropic hormones. These are none other than our follicle stimulating hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, and luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone. Okay. So how are these and from where are these being released and of what influence? Those we are going to see. Remember that a part in your brain called as hypothalamus. Yeah, hypothalamus. Okay. This hypothalamus, what it does is the extension of the hypothalamus is going to be your pituitary gland. Okay. The extension of your hypothalamus is going to be the pituitary gland. What hypothalamus does is this hypothalamus is going to have the neurons which are being called as hypothalamic neurons. Okay, they are the hypothalamic neurons. These hypothalamic neurons, what they do is they are going to release the neurohormones which are being called as gonadotropic releasing hormones. Gonadotropic releasing hormones, which here I'm writing as GnRH. Okay, gonadotropic releasing hormones. And these hormones, they act on pituitary gland. Pituitary gland. Especially in the pituitary gland, they're going to work on the anterior lobe. The anterior lobe, which we call as adenohypophysis. Okay, so it is hypothalamus, the hypothalamic neurons, which are releasing the gonadotropic releasing hormones, which act on the pituitary gland on their anterior lobe, which is called as adenohypophysis. And under the influence of gonadotropic releasing hormones, now the adenohypophysis of your pituitary gland is going to release the gonadotropic yeah, you can even call it as tropin hormones. Okay, these hormones act on the gonads. Okay, what is tropin? I told you earlier in a few of the videos where tropin means to affect. So they're going to affect your gonads. They are going to affect the gonads, the sex organs, the ovaries and testes. And these are none other than your follicle stimulating hormone as well as the luteinizing hormone. They are being named as because based on the function that they do or based on the work that they do on the female gonads, they derive their name. Okay, based on the functionalities of these both of the hormones on the female reproductive tract, we name them as a follicle as well as a luteinizing hormones. I hope now you understood. Now coming on to the gonadotropic releasing hormone, which worked on the pituitary adenohypophysis and released your follicle stimulating hormone as well as luteinizing hormone. We'll see basically what is the action of these two on males as well as on the females. The first case that we are taking is about the males. So the follicle stimulating hormone which gets released into the blood by the adenohypophysis, it reaches the gonads, the male gonads, which are being called as what? Testes. Okay. Now what happens is the testes are going to have the tubules which are being called as seminiferous tubules. Okay, they have seminiferous tubules. In the seminiferous tubules, there are specialized cells here, the nursing cells, and these nursing cells are being called as Sertoli cells. Sertoli cells. which we even call as nurse cells. These are present inside your seminiferous tubules. And this follicle stimulating hormone is going to act on. So your FSH is acting on. It is acts on or acting on the Sertoli cells, and they are going to stimulate them. They are going to stimulate your Sertoli cells to carry forward a process which is being called as spermatogenesis. Spermatogenesis, which is nothing but the production of, excuse me, production of your sperms. So this is, they are stimulating the Sertoli cells in producing the sperms, okay, the male sex cells, sperms, which is called as spermatogenesis. Excuse me. As well as what they're going to do is they have another function. And the other function here is going to be, what is, the first is it is stimulating to, uh, excuse me, produce the sperms. Secondly, what they do is they are going to produce a special protein, and this special protein is being called as androgen binding protein. Androgen binding protein, ABP. We call it as ABP. What is androgen? What is androgen? The male reproductive. Okay, the androgen binding protein. What it does is it is going to bind the testosterone. It is going to bind the testosterone. By binding the testosterone, what happens is the concentration of testosterone, the concentration of the testosterone, testosterone inside the testis, okay, in the testis will be increased. This condition, what it does is it is going to facilitate spermatogenesis. It is going to facilitate the process of spermatogenesis. Okay, this is very important. So this is a function of your Sertoli cells, and these are being carried forward by the Sertoli cells only under the action of follicle stimulating hormone, which is released by your adenohypophysis, of your pituitary gland under the action of gonadotropic releasing hormones released by your hypothalamic neurons. So this is a procedure what is happening. Now the luteinizing hormone, if you're going to look at the luteinizing hormone now, what it does, what are the functions of this is, this luteinizing hormone is going to act on the interstitial cells of the Leydig cells. We use an alternate name for these, either interstitial or Leydig cells. Okay, they are acting on these cells. And what they do is they are going to stimulate them. They are going to stimulate. So they act and they are going to stimulate the Leydig cells to produce what? To produce a male sex hormone, which is being called as your testosterone. Okay, now they're stimulating them to secrete the male sex hormone, which is being called as testosterone. So the secretion of the testosterone is by a luteinizing hormone, which is being present. Okay, so this is going to be the functionality of the luteinizing hormone in the male reproductive system, and this is going to be the function of the follicle stimulating hormone in your male reproductive system. The same matter if you're going to speak in the female reproductive system, how are they going to function? Okay, if you're going to speak about the female reproductive system now, about the follicle stimulating hormone as well as the luteinizing hormone, what they do is the FSH is going to act on, it is going to act on what is, they are going to act on your ovaries. They are going to act on ovaries. Okay, and what they do is they are going to facilitate, who, the follicle stimulating hormone is going to facilitate the growth of the ovarian follicles here. Okay, this is the thing. How are they going to help in growth of ovarian follicles is one step by step we'll say it. First thing, in the ovaries, you can find the primary cells, which are being called as a primordial follicle cells. Okay, these are the primitive actual cells which are being present in your ovaries. Okay, now what happens is, under the influence of the FSH, what happens is, not the FSH but the primordial follicle, they are going to change, they grow up into the primary follicles. Okay, they are going to develop into primary follicles. And these primary follicles, once they are formed, what happens is they are frozen. They do not undergo any growth. They do not undergo any growth until and unless, till when? Until there is arrival of follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, until arrival of follicle stimulating hormone, the growth of the primary follicle is arrested. There is no further growth. But once the follicle stimulating hormone is going to act, now what happens is, your primary follicle cells, what they do is, they are going to grow up into another stage which are being called as secondary follicles. They develop into secondary follicles. Okay, and these secondary follicles, what they do is, they add up many new cells. They add up many new cells around. Okay, and the matured follicle cells are being called as the matured follicle cells are being called as what? Graphian follicle, we are going to call Graphian follicles. So now what happens is, these the additional new cells which are being formed, which we call as these granular cells, what happens is, these granular cells which are developed here are going to secrete a female sex hormone which is being called as estrogen. They secrete now estrogen. This is very important. So see, this is a facilitating the ovarian growth is nothing but, ovarian follicular growth is nothing but, it is from the stage of primary follicle to the secondary follicle, addition of new cells and secretion of estrogen by the granular cells is under the influence of the follicle stimulating hormone from this particular stage. Okay, so you can imagine that this estrogen is actually being called as what? It is being called as feminizing hormone. Okay, feminizing hormone, which is responsible for the female sex characters, secondary sexual characters. Along with this particular thing, what estrogen does is, it is going to thicken your endometrial lining. It is going to thicken your endometrial lining, but in a very minute or very what we call is very in micro levels. In a very micro levels, we can see that the endometrial lining is going to be thickened up by the estrogen. Okay, this is under the influence of what? This is under the influence of the follicle stimulating hormone. Now coming on to the luteinizing hormone, children, what the luteinizing hormone does is, this luteinizing hormone is going to influence a procedure, and this is going to be called as ovulation. It is going to influence ovulation, due to which the ova gets released. The ova gets released. And you know that the follicle, when it is going to get the mature Graphian follicle, when it is going to release the ova, the whatever the leftover, the ova has been released out, and the leftover follicle cells are going to release what? They are going to be converted into what? Now we are going to call them as corpus luteum, right? Once you are going to see that the Graphian follicle, these are the cells inside your Graphian follicles. Okay, and here we have centrally placed what? Centrally placed ova we are going to have. This is going to, the egg is going to be released out. And later what happens? What is left over here? What is left is going to be only the follicular cells are being left over. Okay, and these follicular cells we are going to call them as corpus luteum. Okay, this is corpus luteum. Now your corpus luteum, what it does is, it is starting secreting, it starts secreting P, corpus luteum P. Just remember that it is going to secrete a hormone which is being called as progesterone. Progesterone. Now, what are the functions of this progesterone hormone is? First thing what it does is, it is going to thicken your endometrial lining. It is going to thicken your endometrial lining in a huge way, in a macro way. It's going to be huge. More thickening is going to happen under the influence of progesterone. Along with that, what it does is, it is going to grow the blood vessels in the thickened endometrial lining. Okay, in the endometrial lining, because your new The endometrium has been thickened, so the new cells are being added to it. So the blood vessels have to grow up. So they are going to grow up the blood vessels in the endometrial lining. Okay, so this is going to be the progesterone function, and this is going to be a pregnancy hormone actually. And all these changes are happening because they are anticipating the pregnancy now. Okay, in anticipation of pregnancy, these changes are happening now under the influence of what? Under the influence of your luteinizing hormone. So these are the functions of the follicle stimulating hormone as well as luteinizing hormone in the female reproductive system. Now there is a procedure which I need to speak about, and this is being called as negative feedback mechanism. Okay, negative feedback mechanism. So what happens here is, for instance, now I'll take the condition of the females now. Okay, I'm talking about the females. If we know that under the influence of the follicle stimulating hormone, we are going to see that there is going to be a secretion of estrogen. Okay, under the influence of the follicle stimulating hormone, the estrogen levels are going to be, that is, estrogen is going to be secreted. If the estrogen levels in the blood are increasing, what happens? They will reach your pituitary gland through the blood circulatory system, right? So they will be reaching your pituitary gland. Once the pituitary gland is going to detect the higher levels of the estrogen, now what happens is your pituitary gland is going to be inhibited. It is going to be inhibited in secreting your what? In secreting your follicle stimulating hormone, because it is detecting high levels of estrogen. Now there is no need of producing more follicle stimulating hormone, because already there is high levels of estrogen in the blood. So now the pituitary gland is being inhibited by the high levels of the estrogen to secrete further follicle stimulating hormone, which will again influence the production or release of the more estrogen. So this is going to be a negative feedback mechanism. What happens to the same thing if it is going to be the LH? Okay, what happens is, this is responsible for secretion of a hormone which is being called as what? Progesterone. If this progesterone hormone levels are increasing inside the blood, now what happens is your pituitary gland is being inhibited in secreting the luteinizing hormone, because already there is a huge pileup of your progesterone in the blood. So the secretion of the LH would be inhibited by your pituitary gland just because of the raise in the levels of progesterone. So this is being called as negative feedback mechanism. Now come to the same condition in the males. Okay, come to the luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone was responsible for secretion of what? Testosterone. If the levels of the testosterone are very high in the blood, what happens is the pituitary gland is going to be inhibited in secreting now your luteinizing hormone, because already your testosterone levels are very, very high. Okay, this is very high in the blood. This is very high in the blood. Now, this is very important to specify in the blood. Now, coming on to the follicle stimulating hormone in the males here, children, what happens is, this is influencing what? Production of sperms. But are the sperms released into the blood? They are not released into the blood. They are not released into the blood at all. So how can you actually send a signal to the pituitary gland? That can't happen. So there is no inhibition process here. There is no inhibition process of your pituitary gland. The reason is the sperms are not produced or released into your blood, but instead they are being released and produced into or released into your penile area, is nothing but your penis. So this cannot be actually detected. So there is no effect, there is no negative feedback mechanism for the FSH in the male reproductive system, but that can be seen both in the male as well as the female. Another important thing here, what I need to specify is, in females, for the first 2 weeks of the menstrual cycle, it is FSH release, and the later 2 weeks is going to be released, that is going to be your luteinizing hormone. In the sense, the meaning is nothing but they are produced alternatively, isn't it? Alternatively, the FSH as well as your LH have been produced. For the first 2 weeks, if it is FSH, the next 2 weeks will be the LSH. Now come to the male reproductive system, children, it is not the case. They are going to release FSH as well as LH Simultaneously they are going to produce these. Okay, we are going to have in the pituitary gland, we are going to have gonadotropic cells which are going to have the receptors for the releasing hormones, and they are going to actually get the signaling and they are going to release off. So the gonadotropic cells of the pituitary gland are releasing the FSH and LH simultaneously in the male reproductive system, whereas in a cyclic way, or it is going to be alternatively, it is going to be in the female reproductive cells, children. See now, the Sertoli cells are going to have what, they are going to have the receptors for follicle stimulating hormone. Okay, and luteinizing hormone is going to have what? Luteinizing hormone, so that is your interstitial cells are going to have, interstitial cells or Leydig cells are going to have the receptors for LH. Okay, this is the way they are going to act. I hope now you have understood that how the FSH and LH are going to work differently in the male as well as a female reproductive tract, children. Now let me show you what are these cells actually. Okay, what are the cells present here? Let me share my screen with you. Yeah, I'm sharing my screen with you to show this particular slide where you can actually figure out the Sertoli cells as well as the Leydig cells. Okay, so if you look at this, this whole structure is going to be the seminiferous tubule. Okay, seminiferous tubule. And coming on to the seminiferous tubule here, you can see the whole lavender cell, this huge cell is going to be your Sertoli cells. Okay, Sertoli cells. Sertoli cells are responsible for the spermatogenesis. You can see the way, you can see the primary spermatocyte. Okay, the secondary spermatocyte giving rise to spermatids. Later you can see the release of the spermatozoa here. Okay, the sperms which are released into the lumen. This whole structure is a lumen of the seminiferous tubule here. You can see that the Sertoli cells are inside the seminiferous tubule. And the cells which are outside the seminiferous tubule cells are nothing but what? Leydig cells here. These are the Leydig cells. Leydig cells are going to have the LH receptor cells, right? And they're going to secrete the testosterone. And Sertoli cells are going to release the sperms by the spermatogenesis process. Okay, these are the ones. The next thing that you're going to see is whatever I have taught you now, you can see in this image. So the gonadotropins or tropic hormones released by the adenohypophysis of the pituitary gland are secreted by the gonadotropic cells of the pituitary gland. They are your FSH as well as the LH. LH is working on Leydig cells. Under the influence of LH, they are releasing the testosterone. This is a male sex hormone. And FSH is going to be acting on the male reproductive testis. That is going to be over your, especially your Sertoli cells, and they're going to make them undergo a process spermatogenesis and release the sperms. Okay. Whereas in the female reproductive system, the follicle stimulating hormone is going to work on the ovarian follicles, and they are going to what you call is enable the growth into a matured follicle, releasing the ova. Whereas the luteinizing hormone is going to release the ovulation or help in the ovulation process or release of the ova, and the leftover follicle cells, there is a corpus luteum now, is going to release a progesterone. And remember that your corpus luteum not only is going to secrete the progesterone, but also it is going to secrete estrogen also. Okay, estrogen also. Under the influence of follicle stimulating hormone, you have seen that the follicular cells were releasing estrogen only. Under the influence of FSH in the female reproductive system, we are getting only estrogen. But under the influence of luteinizing hormone, there is a corpus luteum form, will be releasing two hormones. One will be the progesterone and a very little quantity of the estrogen as well as. This is very, very important to note, children. So FSH is making your ovaries to secrete the estrogen, that is, the follicular cells to secrete the estrogen, while your luteinizing hormone action is going to make your corpus luteum to release two hormones. One is progesterone as well as estrogen. Okay, I hope you all have understood the gonadotropic hormones and who influences and what are the actions of these hormones on the male and the female reproductive system, and what are the negative feedback mechanisms. I hope this will be helping you all for your examinations. If you like this video, children, please hit the like button and do comment in the comment section and try to share this channel with many others and subscribe my channel. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you.